So let's review what we accomplished on our last lecture. So on our last lecture, we discussed setting up a React.js project that, and then we started, working with it, building content. So let's review what we talked about last lecture. We talked about that React.js applications are Node.js server applications, right? Where when you create the React application, it sets up a Node.js server and that runs and listens at port 3000 in your local machine, and it's hosting content, right? So when you hit localhost 3000 on your local browser, like we have here, over here we have localhost 3000. You're basically the browser is sending this request to the Node.js server of your React application that it's listening at port 3000, and the server is configured to respond with this HTML document, this one right here under the public directory. And so under the public directory, you have this index document, and this index document is hard-coded HTML content, right? That has a simple HTML, it has a head, right? It has a body, and the only real content in here is this div, right? This div with a unique identifier called root, and it's empty. So you might ask, well, how is it that we're rendering all this content over here if this is empty? Well, in the source directory, there's another file that is called index.tsx, this one, right? That is where the magic starts, right? This is the entry point of the React.js application. That what it does is that it programmatically grabs a reference to the DOM, right? So this these HTML documents, this index page, right? What gets rendered on the browser, we called it the document object model, right? Which is a data structure, right? That the browser parses the HTML and creates this data structure here on the right, and then JavaScript can programmatically manipulate this DOM, right, to be able to draw things on the screen. And so here's where that drawing happens. We have the JavaScript, well, TypeScript, that is grabbing a reference, right, using the API with the document object, right, grabbing an instance that's reference to the root element, this div over here with the root. So it grabs a reference to it, right, and then once it has a reference to it, it then calls this render function to inject this content. And this content basically is this tag here, right? This app tag, which happens to be a function call. This is like a function call to this app function that is implemented in this file, the app.tsx, right? App, right? Which we are importing, right? And we're using this new syntax where we can blend in JavaScript, like C-like language, functional programming language. Together, you can mix it in with some XML-looking syntax, right? And together, this new format, this new language, right, is called JSX, right? JavaScript XML. Now we're using TypeScript, not JavaScript. TypeScript is a better JavaScript, so that's why the extensions are TSX, which is TypeScript XML. Right? So it's a blend of both languages, which a tag is converted into a function call, right, to a JavaScript function, which in our case is returning this content, and the content is an HTML snippet, code snippet that declares a rectangular area, divs, right? That's a divider, right? A divisor that divides content. It's a logical rectangular area, right? That allows us to break up the content into logical pieces, which contains this heading, right? Which is my heading over here. We can see, we can inspect here and see that indeed that this my H1 here is being rendered right there, H1. And it gets rendered on the screen like that in the heading. Then we have this labs right? Where we're going to, it's a component, another function, right? Implemented in a local file called labs right here, labs right here, and it has the index file, which is a component or function that is aggregating the output of several labs, right? Where we're going to put all our various labs into this one component, right? And each one of the labs is computing its own piece. So basically, what React is a way for you to break out, one big user interface into smaller pieces, right? That can each piece can compute, right, its own little piece of the user interface, and then you can aggregate all those pieces into a bigger and bigger user interface, right? So it all starts with index.tsx, then the entry point of app, delegating a lot of the work into this labs function, right? That is then adds some content, this labs header, but then delegates the generation of the content of each one of the labs into separate functions. This is not unlike you would do in a functional programming language like C, right, where you would have a main function, and that main function would call other functions, right? And those functions might call other functions, right? And so the whole program is the aggregation of the computation, of all these functions doing their pieces, right? And now in a non-user interface program, the output might be a file, right? Or it might be a data structure, right? Or maybe some result, right, on the screen, right? Or some graph, if it has some user interface. In our case, what we are computing is this user interface, right? Right now, we're doing some simple stuff like headings and paragraphs and tables and lists. As we progress, we're going to get more and more sophisticated and do form entry points, right? Drop downs, buttons, input fields, text boxes, right? Check boxes, radio buttons, so that users can interact, enter data, and they can post new information, edit, update, delete, right? Retrieve data from a database, right? So that's where we're going. Right now, we're doing some simple formatting, right? Just to get familiar, right, with how is it that we develop the user interface. Okay. So then we have labs, right, which is these are various exercises in the first assignment, right, that I see that a lot of you have already started. Maybe some of you have already completed the labs, right? And we have been creating various exercises, learning about heading tags. We've been learning about paragraph tags, right? Creating lists and creating tables. Right? And here we have the rendering of these of each one of the exercises. Okay. So today we're going to continue, wrap up this assignment. I'm going to share the source code with you. You're welcome to reuse it if you want, right? And then we're going to switch over to the second half of this assignment, right, where we're going to take all these skills that we've been practicing, right, and put them to good use to implement the Kanbas the learning management system. Okay. All right. So that's where we are. Any questions so far? All right, awesome. Let's get going. So this is the assignment, the first assignment that we got started in our last lecture, right? We got started on the labs. We installed Node.js. We created a React application, right, using TypeScript. We got started and we looked at the boilerplate, out of the box application that comes with React, right? And right, then we created our first component, the lab one component, right? And then we included that lab one into a bigger component, the labs component. And then finally, the labs component, we imported it and included it in the top level entry point, right? Our app component, that's the one that actually gets rendered, right? And then this rendered, labs and lab one, right? Which in our case was this exercise over here. Okay. Then we in the assignment it discusses this tool over here, the right hand side tool, where you can see the DOM, right? And you can see exactly what the browser, how it is interpreting the HTML that is being generated, right? And making sure that what is rendered here, right, in the DOM actually renders correctly in the window. And as developers, right, we should always have this open, these developer tools open, right? Because this is what the end user sees, right? This is what we want the end user to see, right? And to be able to create this, we have to create code that manipulates this data structure, this DOM data structure, right? And the way we're doing it is by creating all these functions, right? Creating the app TSX, and then creating the labs, and then creating each one of the labs, right? Lab one, lab two, lab three, right? And then aggregating all this, and it's generating this DOM, right? Right now, all this content is hard coded, right? We're just learning how to break up all this massive content into multiple little components, right? And just to learn how to manage the complexity of building something so big. Even these lab one, even though we are working with some simple things, right? It might it's already 100 lines long, right? So a good practice would be that we break this huge file into smaller pieces, right? So I'm going to demonstrate. It's not required for you to do it in the assignment, but I'm going to demonstrate, right? A good practice is to when you have something so big, right, to break it out into smaller pieces, right? Again, to manage the complexity, right? So you're not dealing with so much content, right? It's very error prone, right, to have such a long file, right? And this principle is true not only for to be applicable here, but in any software engineering endeavor, right? That you want to keep your files small, right, manageable, right, so that they are more understandable. So, for instance, again, this is not required for you to do this in the assignment, but I want to demonstrate. So, for instance, we might want to break this piece out, right? So that it has its own little component. Right? So for instance, we can break it out like that. Notice that if I save, that content goes away, right? So I could create a separate component and call it the headings. Oops. New file. So headings, TSX, like that. And this can be a new file, right? This could be export default function headings, and we can do a return, and we can paste that in like that, right? So now that we've moved that content elsewhere, we can go back to our labs and then import that tag, right? And it's called headings. There it is. So notice that we import it, right? And there it is. There's my headings again. See that? No difference. The DOM looks exactly the same, right? From the DOM's point of view, right, here are the headings we can inspect, and there it is. See that the same content, right? But this lives in a separate function calculating that content and is then being aggregated into this by this one file, right? And we can do it again, again, just to prove the point here, right? So notice that we have these p tags, right, where we have these paragraphs. We have these paragraph exercises, right? These p tags right here, right there, this over here. So we can break that out again, so we can grab this content, we can cut it, save. Notice that it's gone, right? It's no longer there. So we have headings, and we don't have the paragraphs anymore. But we can create a new component. We say paragraphs, TSX, and we can do export default function paragraphs. And we can do return. We can paste that content, save it. Right, it's not back yet. Right, we need to import it. We can say paragraphs. There it is. Notice that it imported, and then my paragraphs are back. Right, and it looks the same from the DOM's point of view. It looks exactly the same. Right, so the output is the same, but again, we have brought it out into separate components so that we can deal with the complexities. Right, so let's do a few more. So here's the lists. Here are the tables. Right, so we can grab the list, cut it out, and then say lists.tsx, export default function lists, return that, right? And then we can import the lists here, like that, right? And finally, we'll do tables. We can cut it out and say new tables, TSX, and say export default function tables, return, right, the content, like that, right? And then we can import the tables here. Oops. That. Right, so now my lab one, instead of being 100 lines long, right, this is much readable now, right? And I can understand that we have lab one consists of several HTML examples, and those examples are about headings, paragraphs, lists, and tables. Again, this is a very common best practice in React.js, right? That it promotes, right, or encourages us, right, to break up large components, large pieces of user interfaces into smaller snippets, right, into separate components that are self-contained, right, that maybe you can configure them, right, that you can pass parameters to them. We don't know how to do that yet, right? and make the code readable. Now, instead of having 20 different exercises, right, of various disparate topics, right, each component can be individually dealt with, right, in a separate file, right? So this allows you to just focus on each one of them, right, without having to deal with the whole thing all at once. Make sense? All right. All right. So let's keep applying this principle, right, and to complete the rest of the exercises. So let's see. So the assignment, right? So we went through the heading tags exercises, right? And then we worked on the paragraph exercises. We worked on the list tags, and most of these are simple exercises. You can just copy and paste these into your index file, right? And just confirm, right, that they render, right, the output renders as shown here, which it is, right? So for instance, the lists here, right? And here's the list tags, ordered list, right, unordered list, and so it renders as shown here, okay? And then we have unordered lists, and we have the tables, right? We did that at those exercises as well. And then finally, the image tag. The image tag allows you to include graphical images, JPEGs, PNGs, right, GIF files, right, into your document, right? So for instance, and those images can either be local images, right, that you've downloaded into your local file, and that your server, your Node.js server, would be hosting locally, or these could be images that live out there on the internet, right? So for instance, if we copy this, right, and here we can create a images file, so images, and we can do export default function images. We can return that content. There it is, right? And then we can, in our lab one, we go back to lab one, we can import the images. There we go. And down here we can see the images. So one of the images is stacking the Starship rocket, right, up in Boca Chica. And it's this image right here, this one. If we click on it, it takes us to where the image is on the internet, right? So there's where it lives, right? Start advertiser, yada yada yada, yada web, one Starship gap, right? And that's that the image, has a particular size, 400 pixels, right? And as the source attribute points to a file, an image file that lives either locally on your local file system, or right, you can reference a file on the web, right? And then it downloads it, a local copy here on the browser, right? And then it renders it. Or it could be an image that lives on your file system, and then you can point to a local directory of where that file is. Now, this images directory needs to be in the public folder, right? So this images folder here is measured from this public. So it needs to have this folder here, images. So if we want to, and notice that the way it's rendering as a broken image. See that? Because there is no Tesla bot JPEG, right, under the images folder. See that? So we need to find an image. I don't remember if the assignment gives you a link. No, it doesn't. So it tells you to search, right? I believe so. So let's search for an image. Tesla bot. We can say images. So let's grab this one, say, we'll view the file, and I'm going to save it. And I'm going to put it in the public images directory. So that is, let's see, in the NEU 2024 summer web dev. Oops, no. Summer. No, that's not it. Where did I put hours? Oh, here it is. Sorry. Web dev. There we go. Summer one. And so it would be public images. There it is. So I'm going to call it teslabot.jpg. Okay. And that's what I'm expecting it to be called. So, and there it is. Now it displays, right? So whereas this image is being hosted by a different server out there on the web, right? This one instead, it's being hosted by my server, right, in my local file system. Okay? And again, images is a folder that needs to be under the public directory, right? And then you put the files under there, right? And then you can reference them here. Very good. Okay. Let's see, close that. Very good. So we know how to work with images. So now let's work with forms. So forms are input fields, checkboxes, radio buttons, sliders, date pickers. Right? So these are pieces of a user interface that a user would use to enter data, right? So maybe if they're filling out a form, a questionnaire, right, or a shopping cart, right? They're clicking. These are, they can click on buttons to add content, delete content, or input fields. They can type the quantity that they want to purchase and things like that. Right? So the most common tag that we use for entering data is the input tag, right? And there's different variations of the input tag. The simplest of which is the text type input field, right? That allows you to enter just a single line of text, right? But there are variations. You have date input fields, we have number input fields, right? Emails, phones, right? So there's a lot of different variations. There's drop downs, checkboxes, radio buttons. So we're going to practice each one, right? And we're going to discuss each example. Okay. So let's create a component where we can work with forms. Right. So let's do that. Let's create here a component in lab one, call it forms.tsx, and we'll do export default function forms return, right? And we're going to copy this here, right? So let's see. Oops. Copy, and let's put that in there. There we go. And then we're going to import into our lab one forms. Forms. There we go. Okay, and there we go. Okay, so let's talk about these forms and how they're implemented. Okay, so first of all, we have a heading just to present the fact that these are form elements, right, and that these are text fields. Okay, so you'll notice the first thing is that we have a new tag called form. Okay, that can contain several input fields. Right? So this is not required, but I'm presenting it to you, since it is a syntactically correct thing to do, right? But it has a kind of like a legacy meaning, right, or use, right, that is no longer needed, right, and that is seldom used anymore. Right? But nevertheless, I wanted to cover a little bit of what the legacy, what the story behind the form tag is, right? So I'll come back to that in a minute. And then but for now, forms are used for collecting several input fields, type input field, and we have several here. We have this input field right here, right? We have another input field right there, and so let's discuss each one of them. Okay? So that text field. So we have here, we have a label, and we have an input field. See that? And the label here is displaying username, which is this username right there. See that? Okay. And then you have the actual input field that allows you to actually type something. Right. And let's make that a little bigger so you can see it better. And let's close this here so you can see. All right, there it is. So here's my input field. And so here's my label. Right? And then you have the text field that we're typing here. Notice that this input field doesn't have a type. It doesn't say that either, whereas some others do. Like this one says that this is a password. This one says it's text. This is text. Okay? But this one doesn't. This one doesn't. So when you don't specify the type of the input field, by default, it is a type text. And all type text input fields, they render as a single input field like we have here. Okay. Also, we have a placeholder. See this placeholder? So that placeholder is like a hint. See it here? See, like it's grayed out. You can barely see it. So that's the placeholder. The placeholder is to give the user an idea of what it is that we're asking them to type in there. Maybe we can give them an example of what we want you to type. So for instance, since we're saying that we want you to type the username, right, then we can give an example of a username that we're expecting you to type, okay? The other thing that we have here is that, notice that if I click on the, on the input field, obviously, right, it gives me focus. It makes it ready. Notice that it starts blinking the cursor for me to start typing. Now, right when I start typing, notice that the place source goes away, right, and it shows the actual text that I am typing. And when I'm back, when I remove all the content, right, it it brings back the label. See that? Also, the browser is identifying that that I'm asking for a username, right? And it assumes that I want to log in with that username. So it's already trying to actively suggest something to fill it in with, right? So which is annoying. So another thing that happens here, notice that if I click on the text, the username label, notice that if I click it, notice that the text input field gets the cursor, it gets a focus. See that? And that's not for free. That's not for free. That happens because notice that the input field has an ID, a unique identifier. See that? And the label has an attribute called HTML4 that whose value, right, is the same value as the ID. See that right there? They're the same value. Because they're the same value, they're associated, right? This label is for this input field. See that? And so the behavior is that if you interact with the label, it's as if you would be interacting with the associated field. Right? So if I click on the username, it's as if I would have clicked on the input field itself. Okay. So why is that important? Well, here is not very relevant, right? On large screens, on large interfaces, is not that important. But on smaller screens, like maybe like a phone, right, or a tablet, something that you need to interact with your fingers, right, in such a small rectangular area, right, the bigger the clickable area, the better experience that you're going to give the user, right? And so for instance, even especially like if you break this up into two lines, right, where one is on top of the other, like here, BR means break, line break. That remember, HTML ignores line spaces, new lines, things like that. You have to explicitly say that you want a break. And so so notice that it's now in two separate lines. And so even when I click on the label, right, I've effectively made the clickable area bigger, so it's a better experience for the end user. So it's a very good practice. Right? Notice that if I remove the for, if I remove that, I save. Notice that now, if I click on username, right, it's not giving focus to the input field, and that would be a bad practice, right? You are reducing the quality, right, and the experience for the end user. So it's a very good practice to put this relationship between the label and the input field. Make sense? All right. Then we have another label here for the password, right? Which is this one right there, right? Which also gives focus. But you notice that the text is I can't read the text, right? And that's because the input is of type password. It's of type password, right? So that means that whatever you type, you can't see what you're typing. It is so that you can protect, as you're typing, somebody not looking at what you're typing. So it's to protect it. Also, you'll notice that it's not letting me type. And that's because the value is hard-coded here. See that? I am giving a value, and that value cannot change. Right? We'll learn how to change it a little later, but it is forever that value, right? And it allows you to pre-populate, right, the value of that input field. Right? It give you a default value, perhaps from having read it from a database, right, or from some data structure, some file, right? You can reference those variables, right, and then populate the input field with those values, right? If you don't use the value, then it's not hard coded, it's not set to anything, and you can actually type. Okay. So first name here, we are, right? This is a first name. The title is John. Right? Notice that there's no placeholder, but there's a title. There's a title. So that means that if I hover over the first name, right, and leave it there for a second, notice that the John, right, kind of like pops up a little bit there. See that? So that's kind of like a hint, like a tooltip, right? That when you hover, right, it has some extra information about it, and you achieve that by using title. Title gives you a small little hint, right, that hovers, then it goes away after a while. All right, so same thing here. We did it with last name. Again, type text. We have the placeholder. We have the initial value, and we also have a title. Right, so notice that if I hover over it, right, the little tooltip comes up saying that we want you to type the last name. There's a placeholder there, Doe, and has an initial value of Wonderland, but I can't type. I can't even delete it to see what the placeholder might be, right? So now this is not changing because we're using TypeScript and React.js, and it's not letting me type. Normally, it would let you type, right? And you would be able to delete, right? And then you would be able to see, like here, right? It will allow you to see what the value is when you remove everything, and you can see the placeholder, right? Also, another point here is that here all the attributes, these are the attributes of values, attribute value of these tags. Here they're all rendered, right, all in one single line, right, and it makes it harder to read. So it's a good practice to break up each one of the attributes in a separate line, like we're doing here. We have the type in one line, the ID in another line, placeholder, value, title. So it makes it much easier to read, right? Each one of the attributes configured to different values. Okay, make sense? Pretty good. Okay. All right. So that's just the beginning of the few input fields that we're going to be using throughout the semester. All right, so let's keep going. Let's look at a couple more. Text areas is big, large text boxes where we can type long form texts, right? Like over here, maybe for biography. So let's copy that and let's bring it over here. So this, you should copy and paste all the content here at the bottom. Let's paste that. And for the text area, you can configure the size of the text area. By default, there it is, right? So by default, right, if I remove this, right, I save, notice that it's very small, right? It's tiny. You can resize it. You can resize the text area, right? But you can give it a default size of how many columns you want. That's the width, right? How many rows, what height you want. So we're saying 10 rows. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rows. Now there might be more content that you can scroll, right, and see, and you can type now. You can type the content. Now notice that the text area, to set the default value, it's within the body of the opening tag and the closing tag, right? Whatever's inside between the opening and closing tag, we call that the body of the tag, right? And unlike the other fields like this one where you set the value by using the value attribute, here in text area there is no value attribute, although we can use it. We'll use it a little later, right? But it's common to set the value also in the body of the text area, in between the opening and closing tag. Okay. All right. Let's see. Buttons. Buttons are for being able to interact, right, and generate events. Maybe for deleting content, updating content, saving, canceling, things like that, right? And you do that with the button tag. So I'm going to paste that in here. And here is our button. And so this button has an ID, has a type button. Notice that I've made it, I've said this type button, we'll come back to that in a second. But notice it has an on click. See that? So on click allows you to associate some logic or some code to execute, when you click on that button, right? And you can provide a function. So there's a TypeScript function, JavaScript function, using the new syntax, the arrow syntax function, which we'll talk about when we get to assignment 3. But in this case, it's a function that will run when you click on the button. So if I click on it, notice that this pop-up comes up saying that life is good, and you can then dismiss, right? Which is using the alert function, right, to pop up a small message. Okay. Now I did mention the type button, right? The type button. So now, because this button is inside a form, right? By default, the default behavior of a button. So say I didn't have type button, right? And I didn't have the on click. So I remove that, right? And so notice what happens, right? Notice I'm going to make this a little bigger. If I click on hello world, notice what happens. See this question mark here? This question mark? And notice that it navigated to the top of the screen. You saw that, right? Let me show you that again. So I'm clicking this, it navigated to the top of the screen. What's happening is that it's refreshing the whole screen. It's being re-rendered again, right? And that's because that is the default behavior of buttons inside of a form. Notice that if I move this button outside of the form, put it out here, okay? I go back and I refresh, right? Now if I click on the button, notice that it doesn't do that anymore. It's when the button is inside the form, the default behavior is to submit the form, right? So that's a legacy behavior that well, it's still supported, but we don't use that behavior anymore since we've been coding everything in JavaScript. Instead, we're going to be handling the submit ourselves, right? And so be careful when you put buttons inside of forms. And so, for instance, we're going to, so if you have a button inside of a form, we don't want it to submit, right? We don't want it to submit. We don't want it to click and just reload the whole thing, right? So to do that, we disable that behavior by saying that this is just a plain type button, right? So the default value is that it's a submit type. That is the default, submit, to submit the form. So we are overriding the default and saying, no, you're not a submit button. That's your default behavior. You're just a regular button. And I am going to handle the behavior. Instead of you submitting it, I want you to instead do something else. I'm going to tell you in the onClick, I'm going to say that you're going to do the alert, life is good. Okay, so now if I click the button, it doesn't submit the form. Instead, I'm handling the event myself. Okay, make sense? All right, so just be careful. I know that some of you will mistakenly put a button instead of a form, right? And you're submitting it, and then you say, oh, I don't know what's going on. It's behaving weird. It's typically, that is a very typical mistake, right? All right, so file, there are also input fields that allows you to upload the file. Now, we're not going to learn that just quite yet. Later on, when we need a server to be able to do those kinds of things, be able to upload images or documents or attach things like that. But this is what allows you to do that, right? We have the input field of type file. When you click on it, right, it opens up a navigation window that allows you to select the image or the PDF or whatever it is that you want to upload, right? So for instance, it might be this image. You say open, and then it tells you what image you selected. You can also select multiple documents as well. And then the form, when it submits, when the form gets submitted to the server, right, it attaches the image as part of the submission to the server, and then the file gets streamed over to the server. We're not going to do that just yet. Towards the end of the semester, we'll learn how the server do that. Right? And then we have radio buttons. So let's take a look at radio buttons. Let's paste that here. There's the radio buttons right there. And notice that radio buttons are meant to be mutually exclusive, right? And what that means is that radio buttons will give you several options from which you are expected to choose just one, right? so that if you select an option, it unselects all the other ones. So for instance, if what is your movie genre? And we say, well, you can only choose one, right? And they are rendered, in a circle as opposed to as a little box, right? And when you select comedy, right, notice that you can only select one. So you cannot like both comedy and science fiction, right? Only one, right? So that's the behavior of radio buttons, right? They're mutually exclusive. So that's the behavior. So the way to accomplish that, right? The way to accomplish that is by first, right? We use the input fields, right, of type radio. That's what renders it with a little circle. Right? This only renders the little circle. That's all it does. Okay. And then notice that they have a name attribute. See that? And all these have the same name. Right? All these 4 radio buttons have the same name, and that's how the radio buttons know that they are mutually exclusive. That's how they know about each other. If we didn't have this name, so say we we change these to something different, right? They have different names. Save that. Now they're not mutually exclusive. They don't know that they belong to the same group. So you could select several, right? And this makes no sense, right? Again, if you would be able, if the intent was for them to select multiple, right, then we would not be using radio buttons. We would be using check boxes instead. There's some weird, some weird image that appears in my background. Oh, that's my sofa that appears. So if the intent is for something to be mutually exclusive, then the way to accomplish that is for the names to be the same. Make sense? Now, it could be that you also have different radio groups, right, where, for instance, that you have favorite favorite colors, so favorite colors, right? And the labels are yellow, red, blue, right, and green. Okay. Now notice that that if I select yellow, notice that it unselects comedy, even though they have nothing to do with one another. Why selecting yellow? It doesn't allow you to select a movie genre, right? It's mutually exclusive across 2 groups. That makes no sense, and that's because they are still of the same group because they have the same name. See that? So to make these separate groups, they have to have different names. So this could be radio colors, maybe, right? And then you can use the same name here. And now, let's refresh. Oh, the IDs are wrong. I'm sorry. Okay, so notice that here I can select these. I can select, and at the same time, I can select independently my favorite genre, and I can select independently my favorite color. Pretty good? Now notice that here, I can click on the label. See that? I can click on the label, and as I'm interacting with the radio button itself. The way we are achieving that is, again, here's the label, right? And it is referencing the ID of the radio button that it is associated with, meaning that if you click on the label, it's as if you were clicking on the radio button. And again, it's the same principle as before, right? Especially with these small little radio buttons like this, it's very hard to interact on smaller screens like a phone or tablet. And so you want to increase the area that is clickable, right? So that folks don't have to peck at small little tiny radio buttons, right? So it's a good practice, right, to use labels, right, to increase the clickable areas. I noticed that before we had the case that if I click on yellow, it's selecting comedy. If I click on red, it's selecting drama. And the reason is that my yellow is still referencing the ID of this radio button. See that? So this label yellow is actually associated to my comedy radio button, right? So we need to change that, right? So this is this ID. Also, there's a big syntax error that we have this ID twice, right? IDs are meant to be unique, right? Within the same code base, right? Then the same page, right? The IDs need to be unique, right? So this should be WD radio yellow, and this would be red. This would be blue, and this would be green, right? And then these would be the labels for these radio buttons, like that. So now when I refresh, now this yellow matches with that radio buttons, right? And these movie genres match with those radio buttons. Make sense? Okay. All right, so that's radio buttons. So radio buttons, again, are meant to allow users to select one of many choices. Okay. So let's take a look at the checkboxes. The checkboxes are meant to allow users to select multiple choices, right, of the same theme, right? So let's take a look at that example. Let's copy that, and let's paste under here the checkboxes. So here's checkboxes. So here's my checkboxes, and same thing, right? Notice they are grouped, right? They belong to the same group, and also we're using labels to be able to select and interact with the checkboxes, right, like before. But instead of a mutually exclusive where you can only choose one, in this case, I am allowed to select multiple of the same group, right? So the way we know that there's the same group is that they belong to the same name. So see that check genre, see that check genre. So they know that they're the same group, right? Also, the way we make the labels associated with the checkboxes is that the ID is referenced by the labels HTML4, right? So this ID is referenced by this one, ID by that one. Now, again, if you have favorite colors, right, you would have favorite colors, and you want to provide multiple choices, right? You have again yellow, red, blue, and green. Okay, you would change the IDs, right? This would be yellow. This would be red, right? And this would be blue, and this would be green. And then notice that the names have to be different, right? Because they are two different groups. So this would be check color, like that, right? And they would be mutually exclusive. Oh, the IDs are wrong. Oh, sorry, I forgot. This is that. Oh, right, the labels also have to reference the correct IDs for the right checkboxes. There we go. All right, so now these greens, you can select all the multiple colors. There should be a break here, like that. Oops, I have an extra spot there. There we go. So it's favorite colors. So they notice that they're not mutually exclusive. You can select multiple of the same type, and same here. Okay. All right. So radio buttons and checkboxes. Any questions so far? All right. Okay, so drop-downs. So drop-downs allow you to select one of many options or multiple, right? But from a drop-down, right? It's a different way of doing kind of the same thing, right? So kind of like you could do what you can do with a radio button. You can also, with a collection of radio buttons, you can also do it with a select, like a little drop-down, but it's more compact, right? It's something that you click on and then it shows the options that you want to select. So this one, right? So and now instead of using the input tag, right, it uses the select tag, right? And and then you can list the various options from where you can choose. Now, if you want to allow folks to select several of the options, you can add the multiple attribute, right? And that folks can use maybe the shift key, right, to select multiple, shift or command key or control key, right, to select multiple options in the drop down. So let's take a look at an example of this. So let's copy that and let's paste it at the bottom of the form. And there it is. So we have a regular drop down that you can select, right? And you can select only one, right? So it displays and the single option that you can choose, right? And then it displays the one that you've selected. Or if you want to select several, right? You can have here's the select with a multiple that instead of only displaying the options when you click on it, it displays the option all the time. And you but use the same syntax, option, option, option for the single selection, but here also option, 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 right? And then you can by default, select, configure which are by default the ones that are already selected. In this case, the comedy option is already selected and the science fiction option is already selected, and notice that it's highlighted. Now you can go and select other options, right, by selecting a single option, or you can use the command key, right, or control, I guess on Windows, right, to select, right, non-contiguous values or options. Now, if you want to, if you have a long list of options and you want to be able to configure a range, right, you can use the shift key, right? So for instance, you can select comedy all the way through science fiction by clicking on selecting the shift key, right? It'll select all the options in between. Okay. Let's see. There's a whole bunch of input fields. Let's just look at a few of these. Here's some other ones, and let's run through them quickly. So you have email, you have numeric input fields, you have range, you have date pickers, right? So let's look at each one of them. So you have the input of type email, and you can give it a placeholder, right? An example of what is that you're expecting them to type in there. Obviously, it says email. You have one that is also, so here is only allowing you to type characters that are valid in an email, right? So for instance, you won't be able to type some characters that are invalid for the email. Also, one of the cool things is that on a desktop, you have just that one keyboard, right? It's a hard-coded, it's a hardware keyboard, right? Whereas on a phone or a tablet, the keyboard can be virtual, right? It's on the screen. And so if it's an email and you click on it and you start typing, you're going to get the keyboard that is for typing emails, right? Which is very convenient, right? That it automatically removes some of the unwanted characters, right? Invalid characters. Also, it provides, shortcuts for, .com, .edu, right? And .org, right? So that you don't have to type the whole thing. So it's very, very convenient. Same thing for the number type. Or the number type doesn't allow you to type, only allows you to type numbers, right? And now it has a hard-coded value, but let's comment that out. So now I can type. I cannot type with non-numeric values. I can only use the numeric keystrokes, right? Keypads, right? And again, same thing in on a phone or a tablet, right? And you configure this to be a number. It's very convenient because the phone will display only the numeric keyboard, right? I hate going to these websites where they're asking you to type a phone or type a value and a numeric value, and they give you the text keyboard, right? Where you have to peck at the small little numbers at the top of the keyboard instead of giving you a nice big keyboard that only displays the numbers. So it's so much more convenient. Again, by using this type number, it makes it much easier to type the actual numbers. You can also give it a minimum value. So you can say minimum equal 500, right? And you can say a maximum of 10,000, right? And so for instance, this is for the starting salary. So for instance, you can type, say, 503 and 4, right? But also notice that it gives you these little ups and downs that allows you to increment the values by 1. But notice that you can't go below the minimum. See that? It doesn't allow you to go below. So that's a nice little range that allows you to validate and make sure that it's within a particular accepted value. Same thing with the maximum, right? If you go 9,999, right? You can go up and down. You can also use the arrows up and downs to increment by 1. But notice that I can't go above 10,000 because the max is 10,000. And so yeah, so that's one great little input, right? That for numbers. There's also telephone of type telephone, which is not shown here. Telephone and telephone. Where is it? It's this one right here, right? So phones. So label. This would be IDW text fields. So this is telephone. This is the phone number. There we go. And the placeholder is 1, 2, 3. Okay. And again, the nice thing about this input field of type telephone is that on the keypad on a phone, right, it would bring up the telephone keypad, right, with the characters, plus, asterisk, right, and all the numeric values, and all the letters A, B, C, D, E, right, so you can type letters on the keypad, right? So yeah, that's great. You should always use the correct type of input field based on what you're expecting the user to type. And range is allows you to select a value, but with a slider. Right now, I have a value, an initial value, so would not allow me to set it. But without it, right, you can click on it, right, and select it, and drag from left to right, and you can give it a minimum and a maximum. Right. Notice here that we said maximum 5. That means that it has 5 slots. So that's you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Right. If you give it more range, then obviously it's much more smoother. Right. But since the maximum is 5, there's only 5 slots. Right. And finally, we have dates. Dates allow you to select dates, and it pops up a widget, for you to select the date. Now, for phones or tablets, it would use the correct widget for your phone or tablet. So if you're an Android, it would use the Android date picker, right? If you're on an iPhone, it would use the iPhone's date picker. You can give it an initial value, and the format, right, always has to be 4 digits for the year, dash, 2 digits for the month, dash, 2 digits for the day, right? And now the display here, the display is shown in the format that is applicable in the particular region, localization, right? So here in the U.S., the format of the dates is month, year, month, day, and the year. Now, if the same exact web page would be rendered in China or Europe or India, right, it will be displayed, right, in the correct locale, right, for that geography. But the value here has to be always 4 characters for the year, dash, 2 for the month, dash, 2 for. So that's how we provide the value. And also, it's when you read it, it's formatted like that. But the way it's displayed on the screen is for the local culture. Okay, and you can also give it a minimum and a maximum. So, for instance, you can say, notice that when you select, it shows that all the values can be selected, right, from this month. And notice that it's the previous month. It's kind of grayed out, right? Notice if I click on it, right, it's going to try to navigate to that other month or different year, right? Now you can um, provide a minimum, right, and a maximum, and say, well, nothing before 2000, January 2000, say 15, right? Now, so notice now that it grays out, right, everything before the 15th, so that you're not allowed to select those dates, right? Because we have a minimum, and you can also provide a maximum, right, and say, well, nothing beyond the 25th. So there, so you can only choose in between the 15th and the 25th, right? And so it will not allow you to click anywhere outside that range, which is pretty cool. Okay. All right. Let's see. The anchor tag. So the anchor tag is used for navigation purposes, so that allows you to navigate to other documents. Now, typically, if this were a plain old HTML document, we could have multiple HTML pages, right? And one would reference another page, and we could navigate and whatnot. And we could have done that. Although since this is a React course, right? It really, there's no real value to kind of doing that. So you can illustrate the behavior of navigating to web pages by pointing to other pages that are outside of our own project, right? So for instance, here we have an example of navigating to a website that has a dummy data text load in Ipsum. Yeah, this one, right, has all dummy text that you can use for formatting and for content and whatnot, right? So we can provide that example by, well, this is the forms. We're done with the forms. Let's do the anchors, right, for the labs. So let's create an anchor example. Anchors. So export default function anchors return. Let's create a div. There we go. Oops. Oh, I need to close this like that. And then in the labs, we're going to include the anchors. So as an exercise, we are asking you to create links, hyperlinks to different places, such as, I believe the example that I ask you is to go to Lipsum. Yeah, Lipsum.com. So if I click on it, it navigates to that web page, and you can go back. You can go back to our page, and we're asking you to also link to your GitHub repository, right? So H4, my GitHub repository, and for me, right, is where github.com. The repository that I've created for this class is this one. So I'm going to copy that URL, right, and I'm going to create a hyperlink. So hyperlinks allow you to point to different places in the web, and then associate a piece of text, right, that you can click and it navigates there. Right. So here's my GitHub, right. So that if I click on it, it navigates to that page, right, and then you can go back, right, to the page where you came from. Yes. So yeah, so practice that. And finally, let's take a look at the fact that we have way too much content in one single screen. Right, that's way too much. Right, it's very long. Even if we're doing the lab 2 and lab 3 and even Kanbas, we can't just fit everything here. So ideally, what we want to do is to navigate right between the different screens. Maybe separate these into separate screens, and then maybe have like a navigation at the top, right? That we can navigate to lab 1, lab 2, lab 3, Kanbas. Right. So let me illustrate that. So to do that, what we're going to do is we need to implement navigation. So to do that, we're going to install a library for navigation. Right? So let's do that. Let's stop the server for a second and install the React router. It's a library for implementing navigation, and we also need the React router DOM. So let's paste that. So install both of them, and then what we're going to do is what we want to do is the following. The way navigation works, right, in React is that, let's see, here's app.tsx, right? So app.tsx has the labs, here's the labs. And what we're going to be able to do is, based on hyperlinks that you click, the URL is going to change at the top. Right? And based on what the URL looks like, we want to be able to display either only lab 1 or only lab 2 or only lab 3 based on what the URL says. Okay. So we'll create some navigation to do that. So to accomplish that, we're going to wrap our app right with a hash router that's going to allow us to look at that URL and based on what the URL says, display one screen or another. And the way it works is that we wrap the whole thing with a hash router, the whole thing, like that. And then in here, right, we want to let's see. We want to say, well, sometimes I want to display the Kanbas. Sometimes I want to display the labs, right? And sometimes I want to display certain things, right? Depending on what the URL says, right? And so the way we accomplish that is um, we surround the content that needs to display yes or no, right? Conditionally, we surround it with a routes component, right? And we need to import that from here. So routes, right? So for instance, if the URL looks like something labs, then I want to display the labs. Otherwise, I don't want to display the labs. And so let's do that. So for instance, this labs here, I want to display the labs only if the URL contains labs. And so we're going to surround this. We're going to surround this labs and say that I want to display this element. I want to display this element of the labs. Okay, not always. Right, I need to import routes. I don't want to display all the time. I want to display only if the path, the URL, right, matches the following pattern. If there is labs in the URL, right? Notice that if I save this and I restart, notice that the labs are not going to run anymore. Oops. Ultra route. I'll just do it here. Here we go. So there it is. So it's only this. It's displaying my Jose. displaying my link to my GitHub, but it is not displaying the labs anymore. See that? And the reason it's not displaying it is that what this says is that I only want to display the labs if the URL looks like that, has that pattern that it has. Now, the hash router it allows me to create this pattern, right? That the actual thing that I'm looking at in the path, right, is after a hashtag like that. Right? So if I type in /labs, now I have labs, in the URL. So if I click on that, notice that if I select those labs, the labs now display. See that? Right? If it looks something like different, so some other text, it doesn't match, and the labs don't display. See that? Okay. So now it displays all of them. Now, I also want to be able to display not all the labs all at once. Right? I might want to have maybe a little table of content here, right, that allows me to navigate maybe to lab 1 or lab 2 or lab 3, as opposed to showing all the labs all at once. Okay? So, and that I want to implement that behavior in the labs. The labs, right, are going to allow me to do that, right, inside of the labs. Because the labs is the one who's displaying all 3 labs. So I want that logic in here, right? So how do I do that? Right? So I want to do something like this, where I want to have, again, I don't want to display all the labs all at once. Right? So I include the routes, right? And then I want to have each one of these labs separate. I want to have a route for each one. So I'm going to say, route. Yeah, there it is, right? I don't want to have all of them all at once. Let's import that. So now I have routes here. Now it's always displaying labs. It's not displaying any of the labs, but only if the URL looks like this: lab 2, lab 2, lab 1, 2, and 3. I'll display each one of the labs like that. Right? Now, notice that, so if I say lab 1, that's the one I want, right? I want it to display lab 1. But notice that it's not even displaying labs. It's gone. Right? And that's because my first route, the outer route, this one, is looking exactly for /labs, exactly that. And instead I have /labs / something else. So it doesn't even match this labs. So it's not even rendering the labs. So I'm not even getting into this logic over here, right? So I need to say, well, I do want to render the labs if it's /labs followed by anything, star. Yeah. Now it renders the labs because it's /labs followed by anything. And so now in the labs, now I have the logic, well, if inside of the labs you additionally have lab 1, lab 2, lab 3, I want to display each one independently. Right? So for instance, if I say 2, notice that it only displays lab 2. Right? Or if I have 3, it only renders lab 3. See that? Okay. Now it's somewhat inconvenient having to actually type the lab 1, lab 2. Instead, ideally, it would be some kind of table of content, right, that would allow me to click, right? It would allow me to navigate. Okay, so let's do that. Let's create a table of content. Here, table of content. Create a component, right, that has this, a UL, right, in the labs. Right? I want kind of like links like that. See that? That create in the URL at the top /labs, lab 1, lab 2, right? So that I can now click on each one of the labs, right, and navigate to each one independently and see the labs. Okay, right. Now instead of having it, hard coded in here, right, we're just going to grab this whole thing and put it in a separate component, right, inside of the labs, and we'll call it table of contents.tsx. And we're going to do, export default function TOC, return that, like that, right? And then we can just import it here, TOC, like that, right? There it is, table of content. Now it's going to navigate in different places. Okay, that makes sense. We can also specify that which lab do we want to go by default. So for instance, if we go /labs, which lab should be the default lab, right? There's no such thing of displaying of all the labs, right? We should want to push you or force you into a particular lab, maybe, the first lab, maybe, right? So to do that, we can say, well, if it's /labs and you're not telling me which lab, I can default kick you into the lab 1, right? So to do that, we can create a new route that says, well, if it doesn't match anything, right, or /, we're going to force you to navigate, right? That's a component in the router library that I'm going to kick you into as if you would have typed lab 1, like that, right? So that if you, or lab 1, sorry. So if you go labs, like that, is going to kick you into lab 1, as if you would have typed lab 1. See that? I never typed lab 1, I just typed labs. And then it automatically pushes you into lab 1. So if I click on lab, right, it clicks you into lab 1. You could have done, lab 3 being the default. That's fine, right? So meaning if you go to labs, it kicks you into lab 3, right? So you can make, any one the default. So same thing in the app here at the root, right? We're going to have multiple things here. We're going to have the Kanbas. We're going to have all sorts of other content, other routes, right, that navigate to different screens. But we're going to have the default here be the labs being the default. Right? So we're going to say a route. If you, for instance, if you say, and you're not telling me where you're going, I'm not going to show you anything. But I'm going to set the default that if you don't say where you want to go, I'm going to kick you into the labs. Right? So I can say route. If the path is empty, we are going to navigate to the labs, like that, right? And we need to close that, like that, and we just import this, like that. There we go. So if you don't say anything, the default is going to kick you into the labs. Okay. All right. So there we have it. We are now ready to start discussing the second part, right, of the Kanbas application. Yes.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. So that I mean the pound key or the hash
Yes.
key in the URL is it's by default when you create the hash router or
Yeah, the hash router, exactly. It is the way that it handles the navigation. So really basically what's really happening behind the scenes is the following. Well, let me demonstrate. So say you go to Wikipedia, right, and you search, say, Starship, right? And notice that you have a table of content here on the left, right? And if you say you click here, right, notice that it scrolled all the way down, right? Notice that I could have scrolled and just moved all the way down, right? Notice that what's happening here is that you have this hash. See that? Meaning you are in the same screen, right? Notice that if I go back, the main page is this SpaceX, Starship, and that when you click here, notice that it's the same exact screen, but it appends the hash at the end. See that? So that's a behavior that's been around in browsers forever, right? Which allows you to have one very long document, right? And then declare in your document, declare IDs. See the ID here? Responses to Starship development matches this right here. See that? Okay. So if you create a hash to an element that matches that ID, okay.
Okay.
So what these folks did, right? React Router DOM to create their library. What they did is that they hijacked this behavior in JavaScript, right? And what they said, it says, okay, well, I'm not going to behave that way. I don't want the default behavior. I'm going to use a JavaScript. They wrote a JavaScript library that receives the events of navigation with hashes, right? And they said, okay, well, instead of you doing the default thing, right, what I'm going to do, right, I'm going to run my own JavaScript, TypeScript code that using those components, right, I am going to hide or show different components based on this hash. Right? We are in the same page. We're not navigating away anywhere, right? Which is what's happening here. Here we are, basically in the same page, right? Where we're just hiding everything else.
Okay.
Right? We're only showing the component that matches the path pattern, right? And we're displaying the component that matches that path. Make sense?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for
So
the explanation.
this is like a big switch case statement, right? It's a switch case that says, if the case is that the path matches this, render this component. If the path matches this pattern, then render that component, right?
Okay.
And together with hyperlinks, right, it allows you to create navigation. Make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, awesome. All right, so let's take a very short break, and when we come back, we'll take a look at implementing the Kanbas, getting started on the Kanbas learning management system. All right? All right, don't go anywhere. I'll be right back right after these messages. All right, and we're back. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the assignment, well, all my assignments, right, they follow the same pattern where the first half of the assignment is about the particular topic that you're learning about. Right? So, for instance, in our case, assignment 1 is about learning about HTML formatting, content, right, and headings, paragraphs, lists, tables, and whatnot, right. And then after you have a chance to practice those skills, right, you are then asked to apply those skills to build an ongoing application, right, throughout multiple assignments, right, and that gives you a chance to practice those skills, right. So in our case, Canvas is what we're building, right, and so we're going to have 6 assignments, and each assignment is going to build on the previous assignment, right, adding new features, and giving you a chance to practice those particular skills. So in our case, for this first assignment, we're going to use HTML, right, to create a prototype, right, of a rough layout, right, of the Canvas learning management system, right. So we're going to do that in a component. So we're going to create a directory where we're going to do all the work to implement Canvas, right, and then we'll add some navigation that would allow us to either look at the labs, right, or look at the Canvas, right. All right, so let's do that. I'm going to get started. And again, feel free to use any source code that I share with you. So this is a good starting point where you can take that, maybe clone it down, or use it as is, right? Or feel free to ignore any of my work, right, and do it all. You're asked to work entirely on your own. That also there's all throughout, even in the labs, you're asked to do a few things on your own, right? So, for instance, in the list of books, you're asked to create a list of your own, right, your favorite books, right? It's things like that. So, same thing here. There's one part, right, that you're expected to do all entirely on your own. Okay, so let's create the basic root component for the Canvas application. So we'll create under the source directory, we'll create an index file right under the Canvas folder, right? So so here under source, we're going to create a file, the Canvas index. And in there, right, we're going to create a little function that will have the placeholder for Canvas. Okay. Right now, it's something just a heading, right? Nothing more. And just to get it started and set up the navigation between either Labs or Canvas, right? So let's create a route that specifically in the app root, right, we're going to load the Canvas component in the root app. Where's app? Oh, there it is. All right, so we're going to load the Canvas component and we'll create a root for it. A route. But if we click, if we navigate to Canvas here, Canvas, right, it shows our Canvas there. Right? Now we don't want to see my name and GitHub, so let's move that into the Labs part. So let's move this here, right? Let's move it into my Labs, so like up here or something, right? So that only will be seen in the Labs. And also these GitHub, we're gonna put it here on the routes here, like that. So only if you go to the Labs would you see the name, right, and the Labs. So if I go back to the Labs, I would see my name and the GitHub, right? But not if I go to Canvas. Also, in my table of content, I like to be able to navigate from the Labs, right? Because this is the default screen that we're going to see. The Labs is the default screen. From there, I would like to be able to navigate to Canvas and back. From the Canvas, I like to navigate back to the Labs, right? So let's add that to the table of content. I will add a link here that navigates to Canvas and Canvas here. So Canvas. So if I click on Canvas, it navigates to Canvas. Now, a little later in the Canvas, we will add some navigation elements, right, that will allow us to navigate back to the lab. Okay. So we have the setup. We have the setup. So first, we're going to focus on the default screen, right? When you navigate to Canvas, when you first log in, the first thing that you see is your dashboard, right? And so in the dashboard, you see courses that you're either enrolled in, right? Or if you're faculty, courses that you're teaching, right? So let's focus on this. So what is in the dashboard? So let's see, we have like a navigation sidebar here on the left side, right? And then you have kind of like a grid of multiple courses, right? And then on the right, you have all these messages. Let's implement the sidebar, right? And then we'll implement the dashboard over here. So the sidebar, we're going to have split this into multiple components. We'll split up on the left side a component that just does the sidebar, and then we'll have another component that does the dashboard. Right. So let's do that. So let's create this navigation here. So we're going to implement that maybe under Canvas, right? Let's create a separate folder that does just navigation. So navigation, and in there we'll have a default index file that will implement that navigation, right? And so we'll call this, export default functions, so navigation, and we'll do the navigation here, which will be a list of hyperlinks, right? Which I believe I have here, right? Okay, there it is. So I call it Kanbas navigation, and it has this UL. So it has this UL. So these hyperlinks. So a list of hyperlinks, right? That if you click, right, you can navigate to the account. to the dashboard, to the courses, to the calendar, right? So that we can bring that into the root Canvas component, we can display here the Canvas navigation like that, and there it is, right? There's the Canvas navigation that if I click on it, notice it's going to add here Canvas account. There it is. Dashboard, courses. Right now, it's not doing anything, right? It's just sending the URL. Now, notice that it's not navigating anywhere because it's still rendering just the Canvas component, right? Because the Canvas component is mapped, right, at Canvas/star. So anything that starts with Canvas followed by anything, it's always going to render the Canvas component, right? Based on anything that follows. So within the Canvas component, we're going to add some additional routes, right, that will display, right, if there's dashboard, then it'll display the dashboard on the right hand side. If it's courses, it'll display the courses, the calendar, the inbox, right, different content on the right hand side. All right, so let's do that. Let's focus on the dashboard. So for the dashboard, what is it? So the dashboard is what? All these grids, right? And so we don't yet have enough to create a grid. I mean, I guess we could use a table to do that. But for now, right, let's keep it simple. We'll just have each one of these be just a little div, right, of a particular width, right, and we'll just render a list of these one after another. Next week, when we introduce CSS and Bootstrap and things like that, we'll learn how to render it as a grid, right, from left to right, right, so that it'll render as many as it can horizontally, and then when there's not enough space, right, it'll wrap right onto the next row and so on and so forth, right. So for now, let's keep it simple, right? Just be each one of these will be a separate div. So I already I'm giving you here like a starting version of this, right? So let's create an index for the dashboard. So under here, right, we'll do on the canvas, we'll create a folder called dashboard and an index file in there, right? And create a function in there. So let's grab that, let's paste it in there. And so we have the dashboard. So now to render this, right, we can go back to our root Canvas component, right, and also bring in the dashboard here. So the dashboard that we just created. Let's see how that renders. So there it is, right? There's our dashboard down below, which is we have a dashboard, published courses, which somewhat looks like this. So we have the dashboard, courses, but we want them side by side, right? We don't want them rendering like that. So we could use for now, we could use kind of like a table, like to split this, like left side, right side. So we could do that, right? So we can maybe create a little table here, so table, and we can have a row and a table data that contains the canvas, right? We can close that row and that cell, that column, and then in a second column, we can put the dashboard, right? And then close that one row. So now they're side by side, right? We have the navigation on the left, right, and the dashboard on the right. Notice that they're centered in the middle of the screen. You can kind of see the guide, the rows and the columns. If you turn on the borders, you can say size 1. You kind of see what they look like. There it is. So notice that by default the content is typically vertically centered, right, in the middle of the screen, right, and so it's and the height of the table is given by the larger content, which is on the right hand side of the dashboard, right. So typically we would want to vertically align this at the top, right, of each one of the columns. Right? So we could do that here in the column and say vertical align top. Right? So that's going to bring that up. Now this one too could be shorter, right? We don't know. So let's make sure that we always align everything at the top, just in case, right? And so we don't notice that by default, the width of the table is as big as the content, right? But eventually, there's going to be lots of these React.js uh, grids or cards or little rectangles. It's going to help be a whole bunch of them, right? So let's force the table to take up the entire width of the screen. So we can do that by setting the width of the table to be 100%. Right? So we say 100% take up the whole width of the screen, like that. Okay. Now notice that our image is broken and in the dashboard, and it's this image right here. This image, it doesn't exist. React.js JPEG. I believe I've given you a link to the React.js logo here. You can go and visit it. It's right there, so you can save it. Let's save it to our local images directory, and we'll call it React.js. I'm not sure what the extension is. Let's see here. Okay, I guess I got it right. There it is, right? The React course, right? And I'm asking you to generate some dummy courses. I think 7 or something like that. So do that is you can just copy this. Wait, this is a course. I think they're supposed to be here, no? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, Professor. So I was about to ask this question. So I
Yeah,
saw the example you gave in the instruction. So I was
yeah, I
wondering
think they're
like
in the
what,
wrong place now.
yeah, would that be? But I tried actually, but it seems like it
Yeah,
wouldn't make any difference. But yeah,
yeah, yeah, it's better that it's there. I'm gonna highlight this. I'm gonna point it out.
okay.
I'm gonna point it out. Here. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna make a post later. Okay. Yeah, it's supposed to be outside. And so I'm asking you to create several of these, right? And so what you could do is just copy one of them, right? And just copy and paste a lot of them and just remove these. I'm just going to paste these several times, right? And there we have a lot of these courses, dummy content, obviously. I'm suggesting that you come up with your own titles, right? And so this might be React.js. This one might be Angular, right? And this might be Vue.js, right? And this might be Rocket Science 101, and so on and so forth. So come up with some interesting names for courses that might interest you. Okay, right? And those hyperlinks, right? When we click on them, are going to go to /courses/ some ID, right? It'll be the ID of the course, okay? And then /home. So it'll go to the home page, right, of that particular course. All right, now, for now, we're only going to have just one template for one course that we're going to prototype, right? Later on, right, we're going to have a data structure. We're going to have records in a database, right, that contain the various courses, right, each one with their own primary key. Right? And so we're going to be able to parse the primary key off of the URL and go out to the server, fetch that particular course for that particular ID, right, and return that object and then render that particular course stuff. So we don't have that yet. So for now, for the first couple of assignments, right, assignment 1 and 2, we're going to hard code the one course prototype, right, and then we'll learn how we can use data structures and data files, right, and databases, right, to be able to fetch the correct course for the correct ID. Okay. So yeah, so we have a dashboard. Notice that right now it's still just rendering from top to bottom, right? That's fine. Next week, when we introduce CSS, Bootstrap, grid layout, and whatnot, we'll learn how is that we can lay it out right, in a grid. Right? Also, we're not going to use tables anymore. To use tables for laying out things horizontally, it's considered to be a bad practice, but that's all we have right now. And next week, we're going to learn about flex. We're going to learn about grid layouts, right? And then we'll be able to lay out things horizontally, vertically, in any which way we want, right? So we'll revisit this when we have CSS. So we have the beginning of the dashboard and the navigation, and we laid it out in a table in a single row, right, with 2 columns, and aligned it at the top. Now let's talk about being able to navigate to a course, right? If you click on a course, I like to be able to navigate and render that course. So let's create a placeholder for that course, right? So for instance, in the Kanbas, right? Let's Kanbas. Let's create a course with a placeholder, and we have a the boilerplate code for the courses, right? Courses 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, this is going to be a placeholder. It's going to be static for now, right? When we get to assignment 3, right, then we're going to have this dynamic, right? So if you click on in course 1, 2, 3, 4, you see course 1, 2, 3, 4, and the content and the modules and the home screen for course 1, 2, 3, 4. But if you click on course ABC, then you would see the content for course ABC. We'll do that a little later. Right now, we're going to hard code all that. Okay. Why is this not rendering? Okay, so here now that we have the dashboard or the courses, now we want to display on the right-hand side, just like Canvas does, right? You either display the dashboard, or if you navigate and click on a course in the dashboard, right, it navigates the right-hand side, changes, right, and displays the course content. The left-hand side, the sidebar stays the same, right? It only highlights a different hyperlink, right, depending on where you are, right, whether you're in the dashboard or in a course. But the right-hand side, swaps, right? It's a different screen. So to do that, right, we use the routes. Yes. So let's go in the root canvas. Now we want to display either the dashboard, or we want to display the courses. Right, so we can display both of them. So we have the dashboard up here, we have the courses down here, right? Or vice versa, we can display it at the top like that. We have the courses up there, and we have the dashboard down below. But we want to display one or the other based on what the URL says at the top, right? If the URL is /canvas/dashboard, we want to display dashboard. But if I click on a URL in a particular course, the URL becomes /canvas/courses/an ID, right? And then the home, right? And in that case, I want to just display the course. Yes. So let's do that. The way we do that is that we wrap this in our routes like that. Yeah. And then we create a route for each one of them. We can say a route, right? And so if it's /courses, it's courses, and if it's dashboard, the element is dashboard, something like that, right? And so if it's dashboard, there it is. There's my dashboard. Now, if I click on the course, this matches courses 1, 2, 3, 4 ID. This and then the home, which doesn't match exactly. That's why it's not showing the course. So we can say, well, actually, it's courses /some ID, an ID, right? And so we could match exactly the ID that's there, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4 /home. Now it displays the course. See that? Because it matches exactly. So we are either dashboard or a particular course that we select. See that? But But this ID is not always going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, right? It's going to be different. Sometimes it'll be ABC, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, whatever, right? So we have to create here kind of like either a star, meaning anything, right? Or better yet, right, we could say I want to assign it to a placeholder, right? An ID variable, right? That we can then query it and say, oh, what was that ID? Right? So this is what it's going to do is that it's going to pattern match it. It's going to associate the value 1, 2, 3, 4 with a variable called ID. Notice the colon there, right? So I am naming that particular placeholder so that later on when I am in the courses, I can query and say, oh, how did I get here? Are there any variables associated to me as you navigated to me? What are those variables? Oh, ID, what is the ID? And then with that ID, I can go out to the server and fetch the content, right? The JSON data from a database, right? And then render that content over here, which we don't know how to do that just yet, okay? So anyway, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and they all go there, right? It doesn't matter. This one is, whatever. Oops. This one might be different. Okay, but they all navigate to the same course. Okay, so that's the placeholder. So that gets us started. When we get there to the course, oh, I'm sorry, this is star, ID star, right? Because not only home, because under the courses, we're going to have many subsections, right? We're going to have home, modules, Piazza, Zoom, assignments. We're going to have a lot of subsections that are going to be handled by navigation inside of the course. Okay. So let's keep going. So inside of the course, I want to be able to navigate, and so it has its own set of links to do that, right? So let's under the courses, let's create a navigation in there. So under the courses, right, let's create a navigation that's going to be a list of hyperlinks that will allow us to navigate to quizzes, grades, assignments, right? We're going to bring that into the courses in a table where we're going to have on the left side the navigation, and on the right hand side we're going to have all the other parts, right? So in the courses here, let's separate this with a horizontal line, right? And in here we're going to have a table, same thing like we did on the Kanbas, right? Probably the same thing, width of 100%, right? Which is going to have a row, and a line top. We're going to bring in the course navigator like that. So there we go. So we have the course navigation, and then on the right hand side, right, we're going to have a lot of things, right? We're going to have either the home, right? The home. We're going to have the modules, right? We're going to have Piazza, Zoom, assignments, grades, quizzes, right? And we don't want to show them all at once. We want to show them when if I click on home, then I want to see home. When I see modules, I want to see modules. When I say Piazza, I want to see the Piazza, and so on and so forth. And those will be separate screens. How do we do that? Again, we're using routes, right? So we're going to wrap this whole thing with routes. We'll need to import that, right? And we'll create a route for home. My AI already knows what I'm doing. It'll take you a few minutes just to complete this assignment. There we go. And so right now we have just H1 home like that. Then the same thing for modules, for Piazza, for Zoom, for assignments, for quizzes, for grades, right? And so we can now remove this hard-coded content, right? And now we have, if we click on home, we see home. We see modules. There's modules, Piazza, Zoom, assignment, quizzes, and whatnot. Everybody good? Okay. So notice that this element could be anything, right? It could be a full-blown function, right? That is a separate component that you can import, or hard-coded actual HTML, right? That gets rendered only if it matches that pattern. Okay. All right. So now we can focus on creating maybe the module screen. Now notice that the default should be the home, right? That's how when you know, if you're using, if you're in a dashboard, right, and if you click on a course, right, if you click on a course, notice that by default it kicks you into the home screen, right? There in the home screen. The home screen is what? You have the modules in the middle, right? And on the right-hand side, you have this kind of like course status, right? Now the modules, notice it's almost the same, right? It's just the modules though, no course status. So to implement it, to facilitate, what we're going to do is that we're going to implement the modules first, so that we can then easily implement the home screen. So let's do the modules, right? So let's do the modules first, right? So that you can then reuse that for the home, right? So we can create the modules under the courses. So under courses, let's create the modules, right? That we can copy that and paste that in there. And so now, right, in the modules, right, instead of hard coding the heading, we're going to replace that with the actual modules that we just implemented, right? So in courses, we're going to we can load the modules, right, and here, right, replace this with the modules, like that. Okay, so now that if you click on modules, you have the a couple of weeks worth of content, right? Now this content is, we simply implemented using nested lists, right? Where you have the UL, right, that has line items, where you have the title of the module, and then you have a nested UL, right, that has line items also as well. So you can list these indefinitely, right, and have kind of like a tree of content from the top level content, right, and then all the sub content within those modules, right. And it renders like this, right? You have the top, and then you have several line items, and then ones that are indented, right? So very much like you would do in Kanbas, right? So this would be a one line item in a long list. Then these are sub line items, and then these are sub line items, of each one of the topics. Okay. So next week, right, when we get to CSS and Bootstrap, we're going to revisit this so that this crappy looking style, right, is going to look more like the target look and feel, right? But we don't have CSS just yet. We'll do that in the next lecture. Okay. So now that you have the modules, you can reuse that to implement the home, right? Because the home is basically what? It's just the modules in the middle, right? And on the right-hand side is the course status, right? So the only thing that you really need here is to implement the course status, right? So we can implement the course status, under the course. Copy. Under new, there you go, which is just a few buttons, right? And I'm asking you to do this on your own. So complete just a few. I created just a few buttons. Also notice in the modules, I didn't implement any of the buttons at the top. I'm asking you to do that on your own as well. And So once you have that, you can create a home index file where you can load both, right, the modules that you created prior plus the course status in a table, right? So in home, right, you can create an index file in there that is just going to import both the modules, the status, right, and then put it all in one single table, so that when you navigate to the home, right, now you have then in the courses in the navigation, we have the routes, right? Instead of hard coding this home, right, you can import the brand new home component, bring it in here and import it, and there it is, right? So in modules, you have the modules, just the modules, and in the home, you have the modules and you have the courses on the right-hand side. That makes sense, right? So anyway, I'm going to leave it here, right? The assignment goes into asking you to do a few more things, implement the assignments. That's going to give you a chance to practice that again, importing and reusing, and also implementing the assignment editor, where you can use forms, right, to implement these input fields, text areas, right, drop downs, check boxes and whatnot, and date fields. Right, so that I leave for you to do on your own. Okay. Obviously, you need to build this, check all this in, right, and push it, right, and so we can do that. We can see all the files that we've created, right, and so we can add everything and say that this is getting started with assignment 1, right? So commit, and we should be able to push this. Remote RGIS, okay. Are we in the right branch? Oh, we're in assignment 1, perfect. So we committed all that and we can push. So we should be able to see what's going on in Netlify. So in Netlify, we should be able to see the Kanbas component that we built yesterday, summer 1, I believe it's this one. And there it is. So there's my build starting, right, from the last push that I did, getting started with assignment 1. So this is going to clone down, right? It's going to redeploy my content from Git repository, right? And so eventually we should be able to see the deployed version, right, at this URL, Kanbas React Web App SU1 2024. Let's see. I think it's almost done. Deploying. Okay, post-processing. There we go, we're done. So we can open it up, and there it is, right? So that's assignment 1. If we click on Kanbas, we have the Kanbas dashboard. Oh, we never made the dashboard the default, right? I think the assignment asks you to do that. Then we click on one of these, right? Goes to the course, right? We can see the home, we can see the modules. You're going to work on the assignments and the assignment editor, right? And this is going to getting us into creating a prototype of what it might look like. Next week, we're going to style it to make it look more like what the screenshots look like.